Hello and welcome to the Doc Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike DeLuke, and it's my mission to help you lead a happier, healthier, and more prosperous life, both personally and professionally. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Doc Podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Daniel Camacho. Dr. Camacho is a board-certified orthodontist who completed his Bachelor of Science in Molecular and Cell Biology at the University of Connecticut and obtained his dental degree from the University of Connecticut School of Dental Medicine. He then went on to obtain his Certificate of Orthodontics and Master's degree from Seton Hill University in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. During his residency, Dr. Camacho was actively involved in teaching junior residents and served as director of the biomechanics course. Upon graduating, he was appointed an adjunct professor of orthodontics, making him the youngest orthodontist to ever have held this title at the institution. Dr. Camacho owns Forever Smiles Orthodontics in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which is a patient-centered and boutique-style practice that focuses on delivering superior patient care in a highly personalized environment. We're going to talk about this practice model as part of today's discussion, as I ran a similar type of solo doc practice in New York and believe that there is still a place for this type of practice today, in spite of all the corporate influence. We'll also discuss the challenges we're facing with orthodontic and dental education as a whole, share our strategies regarding how to achieve financial independence, and discuss the importance of and challenges associated with achieving work-life balance. Let's face it, what we do isn't easy. There are lots of stresses and pressures on us every single day. My hope is that by bringing you this open and honest conversation between Dr. Camacho and myself, it will help those of you who are struggling with the challenges associated with managing your personal and professional lives. So without further ado, let's get on to today's episode with Dr. Daniel Camacho. Enjoy the show, everybody. Welcome to the Doc Podcast, Daniel.
Thank you for having me, Mike. Super excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you on. We've spoken in the past. We have a lot in common. And so we're going to talk about a lot of that today and how we chose to practice and our vision for patient care. Before we do that, I want to hear about how you got to be the Dr. Daniel Camacho you are today.
Awesome. Well, like many people, I think before me, I was blessed to be able to immigrate to this country. I was born in Colombia. And when I was 7 years old, my mom just took me herself, made it all the way here to the U.S., was fortunate enough to be given, an opportunity to come to this country. And it's been a blessing ever since. So we moved to Connecticut after we moved to the U.S. I grew up in Connecticut. And then I went on to become a Husky at the University of Connecticut, both for undergrad as well as dental school. Fun fact, during the time that I was there, which is a total of 8 years, either the men's or the women's basketball team won a national championship 7 out of the 8 years. So I consider myself a little lucky charm for them. But, of course, they've gone on to win more after that. But that was an amazing time for me. And then later on, after dental school, I went to ortho residency at Seton Hill outside of Pittsburgh. So that's sort of how I, entered the profession of orthodontics when I was in dental school. I originally wanted to be an oral surgeon. But then after I went to a meeting of the oral surgery interest group, my first year at dental school, and it was the first year resident of oral surgery who was lecturing to us at the time. And he said, well, yep, you have to go on all these externships and you have to get up around 4 or 5 in the morning, do some rounds, then go do some surgeries, stand for the whole day. And then you're probably wrapping it up around 8 or 9 p.m. And then you do it all over the next day. And I said to myself, I don't know if this might be the right opportunity for me. And at the end of first year of dental school, I had the opportunity to help out an ortho resident with his research. And I'm sure we'll get more into this, but, UConn Ortho is very heavy on research on basic science research. And we were looking at corticotomies in a rat model. And I had to, help the resident out. And Dr. Labrizzi, Zach Labrizzi is his name. A big shout out to him. He was instrumental in my, upcoming. So I helped him out. And, after we would be done with all the lab work, he said, why don't you come shadow me in the clinic? And I said, sure. I had no interest in ortho at the time. But then I started seeing everything that was going around in the clinic, the amazing transformations that you can do with orthodontics, I got to meet Dr. Uribe, who was the program director at the time. Now he's the chair, and all the other faculty. And I just fell in love with the profession. And I knew that I now wanted to be an orthodontist. So that's sort of my journey through that.
That's great. Thank you for painting that picture. And it's funny, as you were speaking, and I know we've spoken before, but we have even more in common than I thought, because, I went to UConn for ortho.
Right.
Basketball, I went to Villanova for undergrad, so I was always obviously a Villanova fan. And then I went to UConn, and my 1 year there, the men's and women's team won in the early 2000s when I was a resident at UConn. And then I've since gone on. My daughter now is a sophomore, going into her sophomore year at UF. So go Gators! Now I've become a big Gator fan. So I've been blessed to have some good basketball past as well in my travels in school. And then Flavio, Dr. Uribe, my first year in my residency was his first year as faculty.
Wow.
Yeah. So Flav and I have gotten really close over the years, and I haven't spoken to him in a while, unfortunately, but really always respected him and enjoyed him and his knowledge and the way he approaches thinking about things. And we'll come back to that a little more as we talk about the educational side of our profession in a bit. And the other thing is, Zach, who was the resident that took you under his wing a little bit. It's so interesting how this happens, because I was thinking oral surgery for a while too. Yep. I have an uncle who's an oral surgeon. My grandfather was an oral surgeon. So I was kind of thinking, I thought ortho early on, like when I was like 8th grade, I'm like, I want to be an orthodontist, and all through high school. And I went to dental school with the thought of being an orthodontist. And then I started seeing the surgery side a little and thinking, well, maybe I really do kind of like that. And then same thing, I started doing a little more digging into the lifestyle.
Yeah.
Thinking about the times that my grandfather, my uncle couldn't be around for things because they were on call. And I started, well, maybe I don't want that. And in my case, it was Dr. Faber, Richie Faber, who ran the ortho program at Stony Brook for quite a while. And he was the one at Stony Brook who kind of took me under his wing and was like, you should look at ortho. And the next thing you know, I started looking at it. He was a UConn guy, so he got connected me with UConn, and obviously the rest is history. So it's funny. We have a lot of similarities there. And as far as the immigration side, being immigrants, we have that in common too, but I was just 2 generations removed. That was my grandfather who did that, who came over from Italy, and then went and pursued the dental education. So a lot of parallels. And now we're both in Southern Florida, opposite coast, but Southern Florida. So it's really cool. So with your decision to go out, so once you finish your residency, what was that thought process like? Because we both talked to a lot of residents, and I've been teaching literally since I finished my residency. I went back to UConn and taught for like seven years, I think it was. I would go back once or twice a month, and it was about 2 hours-ish from where I was in upstate New York. So I would go back and teach as I was building my practice, and was teaching continually in one capacity or another all the way through my entire career. One thing I've noticed from residents is it's always been a thing that residents wonder, well, what should I do when I finish, right? We don't really get any guidance on that. We never have. There's no education. I mean, I try, and I know you try with the residents and what are the capacity we have to help them make those decisions, but there's no formal education in business management, practice management, cash flow management, evaluating practice opportunities. It's kind of like you ask the docs ahead of you and maybe some part-time faculty who have experience in it and try to figure it out the best you can. Because let's face it, most of our faculty in these institutions have never practiced on the outside. Right. Most of them don't have their licenses to practice on the outside. They have a license to practice in academia only. So the system was kind of set up to train you on the skill set, but not train you on how to apply it in the real world when you get out. So the residents I speak with now, they seem, I don't want to say more lost than ever, but just more confused than ever with what to do when they get out. Because back in my day, sound like an old guy here, but it was over 20 years ago, it was kind of like you either went in with somebody or you started a practice. It was pretty much it. If you went in with somebody, it was either going to be a buy-in and buy-out, or maybe it was an older doc retiring, or you're going to kind of join a small group. There weren't a ton of big groups at all. Corporate was not even really a thing in the orthodontic arena. But now I feel like there's so many choices for these young docs, and there's so much debt that they're in. It's a lot. There are a lot of challenges, and they're very confused as to what to do. So how did you make the decision you made, and how has that worked for you?
So, yeah, I mean, I would say the two big things that happened both right before ortho residency and then during ortho residency is, first of all, when I was applying, I not to toot my own horn, but I did very well in dental school. So I had, I think like,
if I read correctly in your bio, you had the highest GPA at UConn, which is not nothing, because the didactic portion at UConn the first 2 years is intense.
Yeah, so they combine it with the medical students. So we take all the medical school exams. So I had over 15 interviews for ortho residency. But the reason I chose Seton Hill, which was, what do you call it? Non-match. So they just give you a yes or no. And then if you accept, you go. And, I say this in the most loving way possible. Seton Hill Orthodontics is in the middle of nowhere. It's southwestern Pennsylvania, a very small town called Greensburg. But don't get me wrong, I had an amazing time there, and I feel so blessed to have been part of that program. And the reason I chose to go to that program is because it's a standalone program. So there's no, it's not tied to any dental school, which for me, the highlight of that was there's no bureaucracy that comes with a dental school. And actually all of the faculty, both part-time and full-time, were previous practice owners, private practice owners.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And so to me, that immediately spoke, this is where I want to be, because not only am I going to get excellent clinical experience, which I did, but also I was given all of that private practice background as well.
Wow.
Through all the mentorship that I had with my professors. And
what a blessing. That's amazing.
One of the most instrumental ones, his name is Dr. Daniel DeBanium. He learned under Gianelli at Boston University. That's where he did his residency. And of course, Gianelli's a titan in our profession. And then he went on to be a very successful private practice owner. He would tell us, from day one almost, he said, listen, guys, orthodontics is like no other field in medicine or dentistry. In every other field of medicine and dentistry, you get paid the more you see your patient, right? If you do a procedure, you get paid. And so that's how that works. But orthodontics is the complete opposite. We actually get paid more the less we see our patients. Now, that's not to say we're going to give subpar treatment. That just means we have to be very conscious of our efficiency in delivering outstanding treatment, but doing it in a way that is cost effective. And so that was given to us from day one by faculty such as these. And so that immediately sort of programmed my brain to think a certain way and to always be efficient while also delivering board quality work. So that was one aspect. I had a very solid foundation from the beginning. But then the other thing, and this was a cool story, during residency, I actually had an umbilical hernia that I needed to repair. I had been having it for a while, but it got to the point where, I really needed to take care of it. And so I said, let me do it during residency before I get out, because once I get out and I have to work, it's going to be much harder for me to take the time off. And so I did that in Connecticut because that's where, my family was from, and that's where I had the surgery. But then driving back to Pennsylvania, which, remember, Pittsburgh is on the other side of Pennsylvania. So that is quite a long drive. It's about 6.5 hours. I wasn't able to drive. Usually I'm the one that drives. My mom drove me. So I said, let's find something to spend the time with, because if I'm not driving, it's going to be really long. So I downloaded an audiobook, and it happened to be Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I had always heard of that title. And it always spurred curiosity. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, what's that about? But I knew that it was a very popular book. So I said, let me listen to it. And so during those 6.5 hours, we actually listened to the whole book. And to me, it was an incredibly eye-opening experience, because basically the author of that book, Robert Kiyosaki, he talks about the differences between, being an employee and being a business owner, and how those differences highlight in terms of, financial independence and the ability to basically achieve your dreams. And so that sort of really put me on the fast lane in terms of saying to myself, listen, I don't want to spend any other time or waste any other time. I want to become a private practice owner as soon as possible after I graduate, ideally as soon as I graduate. Now, then the challenge became, well, as you said, there might be some large practices. There might be group practices. it's no secret in our profession that a lot of our colleagues see over 100 patients a day. And of course, that would be, at least for me, coming from residency where we see maybe 6-7 patients a day on a busy day, right? And then going to see 100 patients a day from one day to the other, I wouldn't have been able to do that transition. So then the key became finding a practice that was the right size and whose practice philosophy aligned with what I wanted to do, and then, making it happen. And that process started. I always tell my residents, because as you know, I'm also an adjunct faculty at Nova and Seton Hill. I say start early. I would say start about a year before graduation. That's when I started to look for potential opportunities. First, decide where you want to go, right? Ultimately, we got into orthodontics because, yes, we love to help people and we love to create beautiful smiles, but it is also a great living for the practitioner. So decide where you want to live. And then once you decide, start looking for opportunities. For me, and this is a shout out to the AAO, they have a career center where people can post opportunities. Doctors who are looking for associates or looking to sell their practice, they post the opportunities there. And I just happened to find, and I would search every single day, right? At night, I would refresh that page to see what came up. And sure enough, one day, this was about February, I would graduate in December. This is 2019. I saw a post about a practice in Florida for sale. And I always love telling this story because, the person who made the post was anonymous, right? A lot of people who are looking to sell their practice want to remain anonymous and want to keep it confidential because of the ramifications of that, spilling out into the real world and both their staff or their patients or the referral sources finding out that they might be selling. So certainly we understand the sensitive nature of it. But we started, emailing back and forth. I emailed him my resume. We started to sort of get to know each other a little bit more. And I really do equate it to the dating process because that's how it was. It's like you're trying to impress this person. You hope they like you. And then, of course, at one point, you have to have that talk, Right. Right. And that talk is, are we exclusive? Are you talking to other candidates or is this real? I don't want to get my hopes up. And so I basically posed that question to him. This is all through email. And then he said, you know what? I have been talking to other people, but you're the one that I like the most. I think you're the one that aligns the most with what I'm looking for. Why don't you come down to Florida? And we'll meet each other and we'll take it from there. And so I said, great. So I flew down. This was probably now summertime of my last year in residency. And we met and we were scheduled to meet maybe for a couple hours. This was a Saturday. We met around 10 a.m. at one of the practices. And then we finished at 8 o'clock. We just talked. And, he looked at me and he said, I look at you and I see myself 20 years ago when I was in your position, and I can't believe, and that to me feels like it's maybe a year or 2 years ago. I can't believe the time has flown by so much. And now I'm looking at you talking about this, but I'm also very excited for everything that you're about to have because I also had that opportunity. Someone gave me the opportunity of purchasing their practice, and that's what allowed me to achieve all of my dreams. So I think that goes back to, you mentioned the corporate aspect. And unfortunately, and maybe I'll get a little political here, but part of the issue, I think, with corporate is that we have sort of sold out our own profession, right? Corporate, at least in the beginning, bought most of their practices from existing providers. Whereas in the past, you mentioned, and now I'm talking probably 70s and 80s, I would say almost all ortho residents knew that they would go out to the market, find a practice and buy it, right? But now, because that supply is much more limited, that's been one of the challenges, people getting those opportunities. But I was lucky enough to get that opportunity. Long story short, we made the deal. He sold me the practice. And so then that's sort of how my first, opportunity to become a practice owner, how it came about and how ultimately it was sealed.
Is a few things I want to touch on there in that story. First and foremost is I hope it gives the younger and older docs listening some hope that the traditional, I guess I call it traditional, but as you were saying, the more historic way of doing it where you'd go out, you'd buy a practice or buy into a practice is still an option.
Oh, yeah.
There are
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, I feel like because corporate are the ones they're sponsoring, you go to AO or a regional meeting and who's sponsoring it? Not the doc that was selling his practice that you bought.
Right.
Right. We're inundated with marketing and advertising from corporates and from these companies that have lots of money to be able to try to lure us in and make us think like that is the only way to do this.
Right.
That is the future. If you don't go corporate, you're and I'm not saying they all do this, but the sort of undertone is this is the way to go, right? Better work-life balance, which we'll get to. You get your 401ks and health plans, and they've created essentially what happened in our economy at scale in the 70s and 80s with whether it was General Electric or some of these big companies, right? They started offering pensions and they started offering health care to their employees for the first time. So we've just followed that same trend. That doesn't mean there are no small businesses around anymore, right? Yeah, yes, you have your big, huge corporations, but you also have a lot of small businesses that do well and really thrive. And there's room for both is what I want our colleagues to understand. Both, again, the older and the younger colleagues. So for an older colleague, you can find a Daniel out there who is looking for this. And I know it because I'm talking to and teaching young docs around the country all the time. And they would love an opportunity like you got. They just don't always know how to find it. So the other part I want to touch on is that you said start early.
Yes.
Because if you didn't do your homework and start early, and I say the same thing to residents, I actually say as soon as you get into that program, you've got to start figuring out a vision of, and you alluded to this, where do you want to be? Who do you want to be? I call it 20-year you. What does 20-year you look like? And I know you can't know exactly and life changes. I feel though you do have to have some idea of, do you want to live in a hot climate or a cold climate, right?
Yeah.
You wanna, right? I mean, we know certain things. Are you hoping to be married or not married? Do you want children or not have children? Mm-hmm. Do you want to live in an area with really good schools, or do you want to live like in a really rural area where there's no schools around because you don't want to have a family? I mean, those are things you have to start to parse out a little bit early on in the game, and that will help you narrow it down. Because if you don't start to do that, what you did, what I did, then you just get a little lost. It's almost just information overload, and there's so many opportunities coming at you, and you start to focus more on the immediacy of the instant gratification, and that can become a challenge. I actually went back, I made the decision to start my own practice de novo from scratch, but I went back and interviewed with multiple doctors from my community, multiple. Like I actually went back and met with lots of docs, went to lunch with them, saw their practices, and really just tried to get a feel for like, what are these people doing in their day? Do I want to work for them? Do I want to go to work? And none of them were looking to sell to me. They were just looking to bring me in. But I started that my first year of my residency.
That's amazing.
Starting that process. And so by my second year, I was like, yeah, I want to start my own. I'm going to do this on my own. And then I took my second year and my third year to kind of build it on paper and develop the concept. So again, there's a lot of amazing people in this profession who have done this for a lot of years, and they're looking for young docs to do exactly what you did. So for the old docs, don't give up hope. And for the young docs, there's a same, don't give up hope on that. The other thing I forgot when we had initially spoken about the similarities is I remembered I was going to talk about Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but the way it happened between both of us is insane, because you listen to this, you had to have surgery during your ortho residency, as did I. I had a torn labrum, an old boxing injury, and I had to have surgery. I had it at UConn, which you drove to UConn to have. I had surgery that summer between my second and third year of my program. And I would always, my thing was go to the gym right after we finished in the residency. So I couldn't do that. I was laid up. I had surgery. And so I was like, what am I going to do? And at that point, I didn't want to just go home and sit in the apartment and start working. So I would just go to Barnes and Noble. And the internet was like just barely a thing at this point. This is early 2000s. There's no, we didn't have online book retailers, and it was literally a physical bookstore is what you went to. So I went, and a buddy of mine, shout out to Doug Elliott, who practices in Southern New Hampshire. one day we were at lunch in the residency and Doug was like saying something about Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I'd never heard of it. And I was like, oh, I don't know. And so I remembered him talking about it. And so I said, well, I'm going to start a business. Let me just start reading books on money and finance and business. And so I went and pulled Rich Dad, Poor Dad off the shelf and sat there with my arm in a sling and started reading it. And that's how I got to understand money and cash flow and finance. And we'll come back to that a little bit more in a moment. But again, the parallels here are crazy to think that you listened to this book because you couldn't drive because you had surgery. I read it because I couldn't go to the gym because I had surgery. So during our ortho residencies, I mean, it's insane. If anybody out there's had a similar experience, reach out to us.
Right.
Maybe there's a bunch of us that had this happen. But so I think it's awesome that you did this and you knew who you were and you knew what you wanted and you knew your vision of what you were looking for, as did the doc who sold you the practice, right? Mm-hmm. He had a vision for what he was looking for. And that is so important. On that note, tying into the Rich Dad, Poor Dad concept, finances. Mm-hmm. I find that concept of delayed gratification, because you could have gone out and not taken on any additional debt and worked for a business, a corporate, or someone else who just wanted to pay you, right? Probably net year on the first years, you would have been better off, right? You might have had a better...
Definitely with corporate.
Yeah, definitely with corporate. Yeah, you would have had a better income, so to speak. But when you talk about building a balance sheet, as Robert Kiyosaki talks about, right? And not just income versus expenses, but also assets and liabilities. When you bought that practice, you're building an asset. And then there are tremendous advantages to owning your own business. Mm-hmm. I would not have been able to retire from my practice in my mid-40s had I worked for someone else. There's absolutely no way it would have happened. Right. And for those who don't know, early on episodes of the show a couple of years ago, I talked more about this, but I started my own practice from scratch my wife and I had zero assets to our name. We owned nothing. We didn't have any credit card debt. We were always responsible about that, but we didn't own anything. And we hadn't started a family yet. It was in the early 2000s. And we had between us about $250,000 of student loan debt, which 20 years ago is a pretty good number.
That's a lot,
Today, obviously it's more than that, but that's a pretty good number back then. So, and I started my own practice with that financial makeup and was able to retire from it 18 years later. So, and I don't say that as a pat on the back to myself. I just say that as it's possible to do things when you own your own practice. Now we'll get to a little later in the episode, kind of the stresses and challenges that come with it. It's not all, not all upside. There's a lot of work that has to go into it. But how have you found the financial side, and how did you learn how to manage that? Because I hear a lot of young docs say, like, I just don't know how to run a business. I don't know how to do this. I don't know about money. I don't know. And I want to get as much now to pay my debt and try to have as much money. And I deserve this. And I want a better lifestyle. I've worked so hard for so many years. Let's talk to that a little bit, if you would. Hey, everybody. I want to take a moment to tell you about this year's Airway Palooza, which is happening October 17th and 18th in beautiful Fort Lauderdale, Florida. This year's theme is From Downstream to Upstream, the life-saving shift, and will focus on something I'm a big proponent of, which is solving root causes to promote airway health as opposed to simply treating symptoms. That's why I'm honored to be co-chairing this event, and we have an amazing lineup of speakers, including general dentists, orthodontists, pediatric dentists, oral and maxillofacial surgeons, ENTs, board-certified sleep physicians, myofunctional therapists, lactation consultants, and craniofacial specialists, all in one conference setting. There will also be social events both evenings, so you'll have the opportunity to meet and brainstorm with colleagues beachside in Fort Lauderdale. Airway Palooza is the only airway-focused event to be nominated for Best Dental Conference of the Year. Plus, as a special gift for listeners of the Doc Podcast, you can receive a $500 discount off your registration fee by entering the code DOCPalooza at checkout. That's DOCPALOOZA to get $500 off your registration fee. I'll put a code along with a link to the conference registration page in the show notes for today's show. So don't miss out on this opportunity to participate in this amazing collaborative event. Get your tickets to Airway Palooza 2025 now before they sell out. And now, back to today's episode.
Of course. So that's why I give so much credit to Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because, I think it's a great combination of, he had a lot of technical education, right? So he was the first one who said to me, or who taught me, there's 3 financial statements there, the 3 fundamental financial statements in accounting. The income statement, which is a lot of, in our profession, we call it profit and loss statement, the balance sheet, less assets and liabilities, and then the statement of cash flows. Not so much relevant for, ortho practices, but of course for big business it is. So just getting familiar with what those are, how to look at them, how to understand them, how to dissect them, that was important. But then I think another big something that he gave me through that book is a mindset change, right?
Yes.
And so you touched on a few things that I think are very important from a mindset standpoint. And this goes back to maybe schools of thought on economics or personal finance. You have the Dave Ramsey schools of the world, which say debt is bad, right? Get out of debt because debt will consume you and it won't allow you to sleep at night. And you're prisoner to somebody else, whoever you owe money to. Whereas Robert Kiyosaki says debt is using other people's money to finance your own dreams, right? And so, of course, he also categorizes good debt versus bad debt. So you mentioned the credit card debt. That's really not good debt because it has a very high interest rate. But a student loan, I would argue, is a great debt, at least when it comes to, let's say, orthodontic residency or dental school. A practice debt is a great debt because you're buying an asset that is giving you cash flow every single month. And if you're growing the practice, you're also going to benefit from more equity in that business. And then the other big mindset was, so I guess one mindset is getting used to having debt. And as long as you know that it's good debt, then I sleep soundly at night. And we'll get a little bit more into sort of how I've progressed from that.
On that too, one thing that may help people, instead of, some people I think get scared of the word debt, but he uses the term leveraging other people's money, OPM, right? Instead of debt, right? Debt, credit card is debt. A car loan is debt, right? It's not going to appreciate. Leveraging other people's money is gaining you leverage, literally, that's why it's called that, to get greater purchasing power.
Correct.
Which can give you a greater return, right?
It's accelerating return because think of, let's say if I had wanted to pay cash for my practice, I would have had to, save for maybe 10 or more years.
Right.
But because I was able to finance that, I didn't have to save anything. And we'll get to, I think one of the big misconceptions that a lot of residents or young docs have is that they need to have all this money before they can buy, practice, especially if they have a lot of student loan debt. But in reality, you talk to any banker, bankers love dentists because we have, I think, one of the lowest default rates as an industry of any industry. And so they're always willing to lend. Now, we get into the personal finance aspect of it, as you mentioned. And yeah, of course, you can have very high credit card spending levels or debt levels. They do want you to show a little bit of liquidity, let's say anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000 in the bank. But, if you're able to, have a family member give that to you for some period of time so you can show it to the banks. That's the way I did it because I didn't have $100,000 when I was, looking to buy the practice. So there's many ways that you can get around it. But the other big piece that I wanted to touch on from a mindset standpoint that Rich Dad, Poor Dad gave me is he says, okay, let's look at the income statement, right? Income and expenses. What is your biggest expense in life? What is all of us biggest expense in life? And it's taxes.
Taxes.
And that's something I had never thought of before he mentioned that to me, before I read it. And so he said, okay, so it's taxes. So how do we lower the biggest expense that we all have in our lives? And the easiest way is to own your own business. Because again, mindset shift. A business or a business owner pays their expenses first and then pays their taxes. Whereas an employee, what's the first thing that we see from that paycheck that comes out? Are the taxes. The employee pays their taxes first and then spends their money that they've earned. So he gave a crazy, amount that I think, like, for someone who works 5 days a week, the first 2 days, all of that money that you've made in the first 2 days will go to taxes. You only get to keep from 3 to 5.
Yep.
And so that also to me was, well, if we're trying to maximize cash flow for the purposes of having a good life and ultimately investing, right? Because that's what we'll get into, I'm sure. And I think that was one of the secrets to your success, right? Not only was it the successful business that you were running, but the excess cash flow that you had from that, you then went on and invested in other assets. So that really was the key. So, that's sort of why, to me, it became a no-brainer. I love orthodontics. And then we haven't even gotten into what I think are called the intangibles of private practice ownership, which is, it really is your pride and joy. I mean, this is your baby. That is an entire reflection of who you are, right? The way it looks, the staff that you have, the treatment that you provide, the type of customer service that you give to your patients. All of that is a reflection of you. You also have your employees, which become like a family to you and become integral members of your life, really, because you spend more time with them than you do with your family at home, right? We're at work more than we're at home. And so the satisfaction of knowing, hey, I'm creating employment, I'm allowing these people to fulfill their own dreams. I think those are like intangibles. And of course, you're your own boss, right? You going back to work-life balance. To me, there's no better work-life balance because I don't have to go ask anybody if I can take 1 week vacation, 2 week vacation in the summertime, or not in the summertime, in September. I go away for 2-3 weeks sometimes because that also happens to be a very slow time in our industry. But I don't have to ask anybody permission for that, right? I get to work with whoever I want. I can hire whoever I want. If someone's not maybe fitting our team culture, I can let them go and so that they don't affect our dynamics. So I think from that, those are all intangibles that I think are very important to most people.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think oftentimes people focus on the negatives of those intangibles. And I love that you focus on the positives of them, right? People look at it as like staff is a headache, right? Or I have to take all my own call. And I will say up in New York, that was more of a challenge because New York in every way is restrictive. a lot of regulations up there. So I couldn't let an assistant touch a patient unless I was physically present in the office.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I couldn't even have an assistant go clip a wire for a patient. I had to be the one to do it. So that was hard. The way we dealt with it up there was I had a group of colleagues that we had a good relationship overall. So we would just cover for each other. So it would literally just reach out and say, hey, I'm going to be away this week or whatever. Do you mind covering for me? And we would do that for one another as a courtesy. But sometimes you ran up against it where everybody was going to be away a certain week or a certain day. Right. And it's like, and so, 4th of July or those holidays, you got to be aware of it. So that was one stress. But in that, New York is a bit of a unique situation, I think, in that most states, I believe, are a little more forgiving and a little more understanding where you can have your staff help out a little. But a lot of those things people will look at as a negative and a stressor. And I agree. And maybe it's just because I'm more of a control freak on things, but I loved having the control of being able to build my own practice, my own vision, right? I mean, if I wanted to change something, and it's interesting you bring this up because I think a lot of the reason that colleagues of ours are resistant to certain changes in my arena where I teach a lot about airway and earlier treatment, cone beam, CBCT, people are resistant to it is if you're part of a bigger group, and I know this because I talk to a lot of docs, you can't just make that decision. If you're part of a corporate, you can't just buy a cone beam, right? I mean, it's got to go through certain channels and avenues, and they're going to look at the bottom line. And those, to me,
and they're notorious for that. I have a lot of colleagues and friends who work for corporate, and even something as simple as, we go to a TAD course and we see all the amazing things that we can do with TADs, and they go try to buy TADs, have their offices, their corporate offices buy them. Immediately, they'll straight out tell them no. It's like, you're not getting that.
Yeah. And it's like I didn't go into this. If I wanted to be controlled in the care I delivered, I would have gone into medicine. I don't want to be told what I can and can't do. I want to do it. If I go to a course, or when I started understanding more about 3D imaging and cone beam and airway, I started saying, oh yeah, I want to do this. I put my machine in, I put a low-dose iCAD in early 2014. So it was a huge expense for my practice, and the ROI isn't direct. So I couldn't show a corporate or even a senior doc like, oh, look, hey, if we invest in this and spend $175,000 on this machine, we're going to charge this much more for records or whatever. It wasn't the case when we made 2D constructs of every 3D image and just billed for pain and staff. But the indirect ROI was one big part of it that we can do as business owners when you own your own shop, because I knew it was going to change my ability. I knew it was going to change my quality. I knew it was going to change my reputation, because I was going to be known for looking at things differently. And it did all of those things exponentially. So we can make those decisions. I love that freedom of being in private practice. And even once you scale and get a bunch of offices, you still become limited in how much you can change.
Right.
Because, right, like when I wanted to implement a change, when I went from, let's say, doing turnkey expanders on upper and lower to doing braces and wires in young kids, that was hard. It was actually really hard. I mean, I had a practice. I was 6-7 years in. I was really, really busy. And it's a major change in your systems. It's a change in your scripting. It's a change in your TC's training. Right. It's a change, right? In everything, top to bottom, your appointment setups. And at that point, you had to do SEPs and then pick up impressions and bands. There was no digital scanning at that point. So, you're changing from all these SEPs appointments and pickup impression appointments to longer, you needed more bonding appointments. But I could do it. I had the freedom to do it. And if you're in with a group of other people, you can't just do that. So I'm not discouraging people or trying to dissuade someone from going in with a group. I'm just trying to point out that I feel like a lot of the reason a lot of our colleagues are resistant to some of the change that could maybe really progress and change our profession is because it just doesn't fit within the business model that they're operating within. And if you're not a solo shop, or you or one other person, say, it's really hard to make those changes. You agree with that?
Absolutely. No, and I think you mentioned something that, a lot of our colleagues, they either complain or they lament about the staff, and staffing difficulties. And one of the things that Kiyosaki taught us is first look within. Before complaining about others, look at yourself. And I think something that is very underrated in private practice is the leadership of the doctor, because at the end of the day, you're the leader of that team, right? You're the captain. And everything that you do will be directly reflected by what your team does. So for example, who's the first one in the practice every day? It's me, because I want to give my employees that example. A lot of doctors, for whatever reason, they have their team go in first thing in the morning, and then they get there like right before they absolutely have to see the first patient of the day, right?
Right.
And so by looking at those two scenarios, you can already tell how the team is going to respond. And I've been, maybe this is just because I'm of the newer generation, but to me, one of the things, I read this somewhere, that for every criticism that you give to an employee or to a team member, you should give 3 praises, right? And so I am constantly praising my team. Every time I see that they do something good, no matter how basic it is, I'm always going to congratulate them, and I'm always going to, praise them, because that's important, right? Your team needs to feel that the leader has their pulse on everything, that they're always watching, and that they're there to support you, right? And I think leadership is key to the success of private practice, especially now in an ever more competitive world, not only to inspire your team, but also to retain the top talent that you get. Yeah. Right now I have an incredible team, and I'm so fortunate to have it. And I tell my patients this, and I tell my patients this in front of my team members. I say, my biggest asset is my team, because without my team, I can be the world's greatest orthodontist, but if I don't have them, that doesn't get translated into that. And so when they feel that value that comes from me, I think that's extremely powerful. So leadership is key, and developing your personal leadership style is important, and also lining it up with the next generations that are coming in to the workforce, right? I think, and I'll be the first one to agree with this, having or mentoring someone or managing someone who's 40 or 50 years old is very different from managing someone who's in their early 20s. Absolutely. And that's the next generation that's going to, make up our assistants, our TCs, our front desk staff, everybody. So learning the leadership style that aligns with all of them and how you have to tweak it, I think is important. So, going back to Dr. DeBano, my guru when I was in residency, he told us, right now, you, in this time in your residency, you're learning how to move teeth. But when you get out there, that's going to be the easiest part of your day. Like that's going to be like autopilot for you guys.
Yep.
It's everything else that you have to do. You thought you got into the tooth straightening business. You actually got into the people management business.
People management business. You got it.
And in every aspect, with your employees, with your patients, with your referrals, with everybody.
Yeah. It's so true. And the control you have, and it's not for everybody. The people who say that, dealing with staff headaches, that's going to be universal, whether you're in a corporate or in your own private practice. The thing is when you're in your own private practice, you can actually do something about it. Right? When you're in a bigger system, you can't oftentimes. You don't have the say to be able to do, and then you have to deal with that person. My practice, I give people lots of chances, obviously, but once I realized that someone wasn't a fit and they were gone, and I could do that. And I could also then have obviously my wife and I were the ones that oversaw the vast majority. We involved our team, but, to who we brought back in the next time or who we brought in to replace. And you can constantly be trying to build and bring in. And I think if you were to ask anybody who was up in the community in which I practiced, they would talk about the level of customer service that they received in my practice. I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back. I'm just saying that you can do that. If you have the control, it's a responsibility, but you can create I don't want to call it a unicorn because it can be more prominent. I just challenge people to think about how many good customer service experiences you have, period, let alone in the medical model, right? Very, very few. So the bar is like really low for how good you have to be to give patients a superior experience, because they're used to, you go into the office, the window slides apart, insurance card and ID. Okay, here you go. Yeah. Good morning to you too. It's like, be seated. We'll be with you shortly. It's like, okay. So I worked really hard. My wife worked really hard to develop a culture, and we had our values. We had 10 core values.
Mike, I think, is culture.
Culture. Yeah. I mean, you have to develop that, and it does come from above, and you have to be leading by example and not just telling them do this and do that, but then and praising. The book Whale Done we read way back. And that's the concept is that with the whales at SeaWorld, when they train, they basically start going through the hoop in the water, right? They just have them swim through the hoop, and you still need to applaud and give them a fish. That's not the end goal, right? You want them to jump 15 feet in the air through the hoop, but you've got to start and praise at every step of the way. And when you start to build that culture, and we had our core values, we had our team probably around maybe 7-8 years in, we built 10 core values that our practice exemplified. And we ended up having them put in little decals up around the perimeter of our reception room. And it was an old Victorian home, so it had big, high 12-foot ceilings. And so we put them up there, and people loved it. And when we hired people, that's what my wife Renee used as the barometer. How do you fit within our core values? We asked applicants about what they thought about our core values, and if there were 3 values that they identified with most, right? You start to build that culture. And then when someone doesn't do something right, instead of it being like, I don't like the way you did this or said this, it becomes, when you did this, do you feel that that's in line with our core values?
Yeah.
Right. And then you're not judging them as well. And the other thing, not to get too off topic and geek out on the practice management side, but protocols, my goodness, protocols and systems, right? And you and I have never spoken about this, but that is something that I did not do a good enough job at initially. I did build them initially. I always knew they were important. I just stunk at it. So I didn't have very good ones. And my wife, with her background as an OT, was amazing in helping me do better in that. And we really built some robust protocols. And that goes for, corporates have them, right? Why? Because they know it standardizes care. And I found one aside, that little pearl I want to give people listening. I always struggled with when someone wasn't doing something the way that I felt it should be done or needed to be done. I always struggled with saying something, because I was like, I don't fear confrontation at all. It just was, I didn't know how to really say it, right? Like, you need to do better at this, or when you did this. Daniel, once I had the protocols, I would say, what does the protocol say regarding how to take this picture or isolate this type of patient? Well, I don't know. Well, now they didn't, in their training, master this, and somehow we got to figure out why they didn't master it, or they're just blatantly violating the protocol, in which way you say, okay, well, we need to go back and stick to the protocol. What I found before that was it would be like, well, this is what Susie told me to do. right?
Yeah.
Or I trained under Jen and Jen said, do it this way. And
Or probably the pet peeve is, well, at another practice I used to work, they did it this way.
yes, exactly. So like the protocols are, and I still have them. I mean, we had a binder in the clinic. They were laminated. And the beautiful part about this too is we had pictures for every single type of setup of every appointment, down to the number of cotton rolls that got set out for that visit. So we would take high school girls who were current or previous patients, and their after school and summer jobs were in the practice, and they were doing all my 3D print lab stuff, all our sterilization, all our chair turnover. They would set up for the next day for our clinicians. So my trained, skilled clinicians could be focused on being chairside and front facing for the patients and not running around. And they would do all my restocking. Everything was built with systems. So that, going through almost 2 decades and learning the hard way on what it's like when you don't do that, it is very freeing. So for all the private practice docs out there who can do those things, it is really valuable to have systems in place.
Absolutely. And I think once you establish that culture, and this has been my experience, I now find that I don't have to, call out a lot of these deficiencies when they do happen. It's the other team members who now call them out. And they don't call them out in a mean-spirited way. They just call them out saying, hey, remember, this is how we do it. And we do it because it's either easier for us, right? And that's what I tell my staff. Everything that I try to implement is to make all of our jobs easier. We want to work smarter, not harder.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mine would call it the DeLuke Ortho way. And it was like, that's not the DeLuke Ortho way. Like that was our culture. Like we have a set way to do it. And I get it's going to be different than where else you might've worked, or, and if it's not for you, then let me know, because then we'll just part ways as friends. And that's that. So those are just some little pearls there. On the financial side, we kind of teased that a little bit when we were talking before. How have you started to implement the concepts of, and going to Rich Dad Poor Dad again here, delayed gratification and creating that margin, right? We talked about the small business having tremendous tax advantages as well, and how you can keep more of your money. Again, as Kawasaki talks about, right? It's not what you make, it's what you keep.
Correct.
So how you can keep more of your money. I had my accountant on a bunch, and he was on a 5-part series. I've had my financial advisor on for a 2-part series on the podcast. I can post links to all those of our show today. And I have another finance guy coming on in probably about a month or 2, and just trying to help figure out how we can keep more of our money. But the point I want to get to is, once we keep that money, it burns a hole in a lot of people's pockets.
Yeah.
And a lot of people spend that money right away. How do you resist that temptation? And what is your advice to others on how to remain disciplined in your spending?
I think that's a great question. Now, going back just for a second, even to, like, let's say when I was looking for practices, right? And so I talked about the one that I ultimately ended up purchasing, but there was other opportunities that I also entertained. And it just goes back to basic, investing, I guess, because that's how you have to look at your practice purchase, right? It's an investment that you're making. And the best investments are the buy low and sell high type of investments. So when I was going out there, yes, I saw ones that were more developed, maybe had a bigger patient base. But again, that I thought would have been too overwhelming for me from the management standpoint, because it's a bigger team, more patients to see, more moving parts. And of course, a lot more expensive, because remember, in our field, and really this is just the nature of any business transaction or any business purchases, the value of the business is directly tied to its cash flow. So how profitable is it? How much money it's making? And so when I saw these bigger practices compared to the one that I eventually went to, which was a much smaller practice, very dated decor, they still had the film PanCef machine, right? The ones that you use to develop. No intraoral scanner, paper charts. The computers that they were running had Windows 98. That was the operating system. Oh my gosh!
So, and what year was this about? That this was?
This was 2020.
Oh my gosh! I thought you were like mid to late teens. No. Wow. Okay.
But you know what? I didn't let that dissuade me from buying it, because at the end of the day, I looked at the financial statements, and this practice was very profitable. Even though it wasn't making that much money, it was very profitable and it had cash flow from day one. And I also talked to a lot of residents. They come to me and it's great that you can give your perspective on startups, but I say to them, in very competitive markets, startups can be a little tricky. Because yes, you have the latest and the greatest in terms of architectural design, in terms of equipment, but you don't have any patients and you don't have any cash flow, any guaranteed cash flow from day one. If you purchase an ortho practice, even if it's the one that I just described, dated and old and what have you, there's still cash flow. And remember, in orthodontics, we also have something great that most other specialties don't, which is a contracts receivable balance, which is the money that the patients still owe the practice. Because remember, most patients pay monthly, right? They go on the installment plans. You're actually buying that chunk of money already as part of your practice purchase. So you do have guaranteed money from day one. And I
should sorry to interrupt for a second here, but I should clarify because it's such a good point, and I'm glad you brought this up. I didn't open my forever practice, so to speak, my big building and all finished out the way I wanted it right away. I actually sublet space from another orthodontist in his satellite. It was an older guy, almost exactly like what you described, Jim Chauvin. He's amazing. And I've always said, I'll always owe Jim for giving me this opportunity. He was in this, it was only 2 days a week in this little satellite, which happened to be in my hometown where the satellite was. And I went to him and said, the 3 days you're not here, like what happens with the practice? I said, I don't want to be part of your practice. I don't want to have anything to do with each other's businesses, but could I sublet this space from you the days you're not here? And he literally, I remember meeting with him and he said, sure. And I said, well, my concern, Dr. Chauvin, is I'm going to probably outgrow this. It was a small little office footprint. I said, I would hope to outgrow this and get my own bigger practice. And I don't want to do this for a year or two and then move across the street from you and become one of your competitors, because I don't want to sign a covenant or anything. We're going to be totally separate. And he looked at me and he's like, Michael, he goes, I don't care. He's like, I've been doing this for 35 years. I'm established in my patient base and my referrals. I'm not worried about it. I'm happy to help. So again, there are so many good people out there in this profession, right? I literally just split the rent with him. And what it let me do, Daniel, is I didn't have to buy chairs. I didn't have to buy hand pieces. You get such great grad deals coming out that, you finance stuff over a year for your brackets and your wires. So that cost was minimal. And I was able to use his sterilizers. And so there are people out there, and I've known and helped other people who have done similar things. Just ask around, because you're 110% right. If you walk out day one and try to build your forever practice, there's a good chance, especially with how expensive rents are today, especially in a competitive marketplace, like you said, you could sink yourself and you could end up really creating a lot of problems. So start small if you are going to start your own, unless you just have unlimited reserves, which some people do. But if you don't, then start small in that way. So thank you for bringing that up. I should have clarified that before.
Yes, no. So I think that was huge for me. And of course, I bought low because it was a smaller practice. But now over these 5 years that I've been the owner, we've more than tripled the size of the practice. And now that's equity in my pocket, right? Yeah. And all throughout, and the episodes, by the way, of your accountant and your financial advisor are amazing. I highly recommend that everybody listen to it. I listened to it multiple times. During that time that you're now have the business, you're able to do a lot of what they talk about with the 401ks, with the expensing of equipment and expensing of other things, to really jumpstart the practice and your own personal financial journey towards financial independence.
Yeah, and then how do you know what to do with the cash flow off your business? How does it not burn a hole in your pocket? How do you not just go spend it and just spend it on what Kawasaki calls doodads, right? A rich dad calls doodads, right? Yeah. Stuff that doesn't put money back in your pocket. An asset is something that puts money back in your pocket. I remember on the book, one of the first things I read that I was like, I don't think this is right in this book. Again, how naive we are back when he's like, your house is not an asset. Right. I was like, what? I'm like, yeah, it is. I've always been taught my house is your biggest asset, right? And then he starts to explain why it's not an asset at all. And it's not, because your house takes money out of your pocket. Even if you sell it for double what you bought it for, if you own that for 30 years after you add in the interest and the taxes and the maintenance and it took money out of your pocket. So assets put money in your pocket. Liabilities take money out. So how have you approached, you don't have to get specific on details, but how have you approached the asset building side for someone who is starting to see great returns on the cash flow side early in your career?
Well, and again, I think even he gives us the blueprint, right? He talks about the working class. Unfortunately, they don't have excess income to invest. Mm-hmm. He talks about the middle class. They use their excess income to spend on depreciating assets, on cars, on houses, on boats, on all those things. And then the rich, they use their excess income to invest in assets. And so I think even, again, just creating that mindset and saying, hey, what do I want for myself? What you mentioned, the 20-year me. Well, the 20-year me doesn't want to have to work 5 days as an orthodontist unless I still want to, right?
Right.
And that's something that I do envision myself practicing for a long time, but I want to cut back and sort of do the things that you do. And so, I love that we have all these similarities, because ultimately, and I don't think I've told you this in person, but you're a great mentor of mine, and you're a great role model of what I want to be. I want to be able to enjoy, when you're still relatively young and you have your health and you have all this energy to go travel, to enjoy your family, to enjoy your kids, to be able to go to your kids' college and if they do any sports, to all of that stuff, to not be tied to your practice because you haven't been smart about the investments that you should have made early on in your career. And now you're sort of having to play catch up, which unfortunately is what a lot of our colleagues do. I think it goes back to just simple stuff, right? Don't do the keeping up with the Joneses, understand what's important to you. And even as a young doc, I can tell you, I don't deprive myself. I go on nice vacations when I'm able to. I go to a nice dinner here and there when I want to, when it's a special occasion. But at the same time, keep it under control. Don't go buy a much bigger house than you may otherwise not need. Don't get multiple cars. Don't get really fancy cars. It's simple stuff. Like, really find out what it is that really makes you happy. And then by all means, no holding back on that. Go for it. But be smart about it and be controlled about it. And know that once you start investing in those assets and you start to see what those assets are doing without you moving a single finger besides the initial investment, that's really powerful. And that becomes its own motivation to say, hey, I want to keep doing more of this because this is cool. I bought this duplex in Indianapolis. I've never seen it before. And yet every month I got to rent, I got a check in the mail. Like, how cool is that? And I haven't had to invest anything yet in it except the initial that I did. And again, I got a mortgage for it. So all I put it was a down payment. And so it's using other people's money and I'm positive cash flow every month.
That's it. I mean, that's it. You are, first of all, thank you for the compliment, by the way. I'm honored and humbled by that. And you are doing amazing things at a young age. It's really, really cool. You are going to be a mentor for a lot of people because you not only are making a lot of great decisions, you know who you are and what you want. And I feel like that's so rare today, right? I've been teaching residents for a long time. I feel like a lot of times we're inundated with just so many stimuli on be like this, do this, follow this person, watch this person, have this. It's this instant gratification society. It's really hard to step back from that and look at yourself and say, but what do I want? Right? For you like from hearing what you said, like taking a really nice vacation or some nice travel is what you want. Maybe someone has no concern for travel. They like cars, so get a sports car. But you can't do all of it right away, right? But don't deprive yourself from, you don't have to live like you live as a resident for your first 5 years of practice. You can add niceties to your life and experiences without having to try to get the nice car, go on the long, expensive vacations, get the huge forever house, buy the Rolex, buy the diamonds. Like, if you do all of that, what I don't think people realize is, and why I want to point it out, if you did all that you wouldn't have had the money to get the mortgage on the duplex in Indianapolis.
Exactly.
And that's what people don't think about is they think, well, I'll just work for an extra year in the end, or I'll just do at a relative who was a surgeon and he would say like, I'll just do one more surgery. Right. Like, okay, now because you're younger and healthier, but that one expense of that surgery, if you did one more surgery and invested and saved that money, think of how many fewer surgeries you would have to do throughout your entire life. Or for us, how many fewer teeth you would have to straighten. And I'm not saying want to, because as you said, and I agree, like if you want to do it, then keep doing it forever. Have to do it. There's a big difference in doing something because you want to and because you have to. And to me, money is freedom. The book Psychology of Money.
Yes.
And it's such a great book as well, because it talks a lot about money is a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Right.
But in the end, for all of us, it's freedom. Mm-hmm. And it's the freedom to do exactly what you just said, which is if you want to go travel, great. If you want to spend time with family, great. What are your values and what do you want? And you're doing that. And I can tell you, you are going to be tremendously successful in that regard 10, 15, 20 years down the road because you have that mentality and that fiscal discipline now. And things I did back then. And the tough part is it takes a little time for it to mature and grow. Right. And so, but you're so right. Once you start seeing truly passive income come in, it's pretty addicting. It's
exactly.
Like, oh, wait, I could do this. Again, Kawasaki talks about this. Then maybe get a 4-unit place, right? And maybe roll that one into a bigger one, sell it, do a 1031 exchange and roll it into a bigger one. It's monopoly. I mean, it's the same concept. Who in monopoly doesn't like having lots of hotels on the board, right? I mean, like, we know this is what you want. So the concepts are there, and it's something that I'm so glad you brought attention to, and I really give you a lot of credit for doing it young. And it's such an inspiration to so many younger docs who just maybe don't know what's possible, and maybe just have never seen anybody that did it.
And I think that just my last point on that.
Yeah, please.
And I tell my residents all the time, I think something that corporate has been able to successfully do is to break the entrepreneurial spirit of dentists. Because again, in the past, this is what we all did. We used to all go out, find businesses, become business owners, and run our own businesses. And we were much more profitable for it. Why do you think they're also so aggressive trying to buy these practices? Because again, looking across industries, our profit margins are insane. Right. If we compare it to, let's say, the restaurant industry or a grocery
store,
industry,
like 2%, right? In a grocery store.
I mean, and if you run I believe that if you run a very successful and lean ortho practice, there is no way you shouldn't have more than 50% overhead. So your profit margin is literally 50%, and it can become much higher. I mean, these companies or these investment banks or Wall Street, whatever you want to call them, they look at those margins, and of course they want their hands in that. And that's why they're so aggressive. Now, when I also talk to my older docs, and I tell them, you have to be careful because these offers may seem lucrative, but at the end of the day, I think they're much smarter than you, right? Wall Street is always going to be much smarter than us. So they're never going to make a bad deal. They're always
it's like trying to beat the house in Vegas. Yes. It's like going to Vegas and thinking you're going to win in the long run.
Like they're never going to make a bad deal. So you have to be very careful. And I think because of the interest rate changes and because of many changes in the industries, I think that docs are starting to realize that. And I do believe that it is now again becoming more palatable to them or more attractive to sell to individual docs, because one thing that really has gone completely lost in these corporate deals is the 100% buyout, right? Like, here's your money, here's your asking price, and you can leave, in 3-6 months and you got all your money up front. I think that is very attractive to people looking to sell. And I think for that purpose or for that reason, I think it's going to make a comeback, the transitions of doctor to doctor. And I hope, because that's something I tell my residents. Why am I so pro private practice? Because not only do I feel that it's going to be much more rewarding to you on a personal level and a financial level, but it's going to be much better for the profession as a whole. Because I know that you, doc, single doc, probably are not going to be wanting to see 100 to 150 patients a day. You're probably going to see more along maybe 50, 60, if you know how to run your practice successfully so that you don't have to see so many patients, but still make a very good living. And so I'm going to have less competition from you, private doc. And I don't really see it as a competition, but if we're talking about like an industry standpoint, I'd much rather compete with you versus the corporates of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And the patient care side is huge as well, right? Because
not even a question.
And I've said for a long time, I'm long on private boutique style private practice. I just don't see a time when, and again, it's not for everybody. Not every doc wants to do it. I get it. And I know you aren't saying that saying that either. I just don't want people to give up on the thought that it's a thing, and it can be a thing of a small practice. Because the patient care you can deliver with that, patients crave it. People are tired of being treated, as we were referencing before, like they get treated in the average medical or even now, sadly, dental office. It's so people used to just be like, I just enjoy coming here. It's like everybody's actually nice to me. We would hear that often. Like, everybody's nice to me here. Everyone's smiling. Like, when do you go to a doctor's office and everyone's walking around smiling? We would hear things like that, which on one hand, it's kind of sad, but on the other hand, what an opportunity, right? Like,
for differentiation.
For differentiation. I mean, it's not hard to be an outlier in customer service. It's really not hard. I mean, it's challenging to execute in ways, but it's not like the bar is very high. And once you start to do that and create that culture and that mindset, as we said earlier, you can do that. And so I feel that there's a tremendous opportunity. I think the more that things are corporatized, and I'm not putting out any specific corporates, it's just the more that things are standardized and corporatized, the more opportunity there is for the smaller practice to carve out that niche and kind of be like, look, here's what I do, and it's different, and we're different. And you don't have the pressures of the overhead and meeting a certain number of starts in X, right, or seeing X number of, you don't have those pressures. It's like, how much do you want to bring home? And you can kind of pick your number and work that amount.
It's up to you. And something that, the orthodontist that I bought the practice from, he taught me a very wise, example. He said, picture that you have 3 cups in life and they're filled with water, but you can't fill all of them. The only way you can fill one is by taking from the other 2 and pouring it into that. And those 3 cups are health, happiness, and money. And you have to figure out what your balance is. So he taught me you can always make more money in orthodontics, right? You can see more patients, you can open Saturdays, you can open up multiple locations, you can buy other practices, but you have to know that you're going to be sacrificing from these other 2 cups, which is happiness and health. And so finding the balance is important. And I think it goes back to keeping up with the Joneses, find what level is right for you, that you're willing to sacrifice, because yes, going back to, let's say, the cons of practice ownership, there are sacrifices, right? As we said, I think you and I operated the same way. We're the first people inside the door and we're the last ones to leave. We're putting hours on the weekends. We're putting hours late at night. We're always constantly thinking about how we can improve our practice, anywhere from operations, from systems, from marketing, from investing in the practice. So yes, that does take some dedication, but at the same time, figuring out what that balance is going to be for you, I think is very important. And I think it's very doable. I have some colleagues of mine, some female colleagues, and they have their own private practice and they work 2 days a week, and they figured it out that that's enough for them. They have families, so they have a great balance. I would also argue, a lot of people say, oh, well, I want work-life balance, so I'm going to go work for corporate. That's certainly a possibility, but I would argue to you, you can have better work-life balance and also make more money, even in private practice, if you structure it the right way. Or perhaps you go partner with somebody who also only wants to work part-time. And so then you two share the load, sort of how you did with your friend who let you do the sublease. There's many, many ways that we can do it. But really that's what I emphasize to my residents, to anybody they talk to anybody who's listening to this podcast, is private practice ownership is the way to go. Don't let debt stop you. Student debt won't stop you. If you have good personal financial discipline, the banks will lend to you. And then it's just about growing the asset column like you did, Mike. Start with your practice, because that's what's going to feed everything else. Then you can do other private investments. You can buy the real estate of your practice if you're able to. That's huge. And that's something that, I was blessed and fortunate to do at the beginning of this year. And then go on to do other things. I think another important and very interesting model for us is that pedo ortho model. I think there's a lot that can be done there. So I would encourage other people to, explore that possibility too.
I love all of that. And thank you for explaining that so well. And it is true. And I agree with everything you said. And I'll even take it a step further on the side of the pressures to, whether it's keep up with the Joneses or always keep achieving more. One weakness I had was I always wanted to see my numbers grow because I'm competitive and with myself. And I don't mean the dollar. It didn't have to be. It wasn't like at that point. It was not about. It sounds cliche. I don't mean to sound condescending, but it wasn't about the money at that point. We're talking like 14, 15 years into practice. We were doing very, very well. It wasn't like needing to make an extra, say, 100,000 in a given period of time. It was like, well, I don't want to do worse than I did last year, right? Like I don't, and that was a trap I fell into that I want to give docs out there. It's okay. And because the consultants and you're reading these things of your practice should grow X% year on year. And if you're not, you're going backwards. And if you're not growing, you're shrinking. And we hear all these things. And unfortunately, my competitive side got the better of me for a few years there. And it worked as a positive in one way because it made me really like rehone all my systems and really dig in on where I was inefficient. And I built an extremely efficient machine clinically through that, and my wife on the front end. So that was great. The tough part is there still were more patients that wanted to come in. So when I started realizing this, and I was like you, I liked seeing like 60, 65 patients a day. If it was like summer or school holiday or a crazy day, you might get 70, 75. But I was like, if you do this well, if you're seeing 100 patients a day, you're not impressing me.
Yeah.
like that is not impressing. There's an inefficiency there somewhere. Right. And I'm not being critical of people who do it. I mean that I wholeheartedly. Run your practice the way you want. It's just a lot of times we throw these numbers around like, oh, I see X many patients a day. I was always trying to produce more and do better quality of work by seeing fewer patients a day.
Yes.
That was always my goal. I look at it as the per visit fee. Like, what am I getting, right? And like per patient visit per day, what am I able to generate in revenue in a day per patient that I saw? And that was a number. I didn't even know it's a metric people measure, but I was like, look, if I can generate X dollars seeing 50 patients and that same X seeing 75 patients, why wouldn't I want to do it seeing 50? Right. Right. So that was one part. The other was, we got offers and people said like, well, you've built such a model that if you scale this and do a couple other practices, get a couple satellites, you could literally have, a tremendous asset that you could sell to corporate for many, many, many millions. And my wife and I instantly were like, no, thanks. Yeah. Because, and people, this is not an exaggeration. I was literally booking out new patient exams at times 5-6 months out.
Oh my God. That's incredible.
And people were waiting. Yeah. And then to get started, once you came in, we would do a same day start if like there was a last minute cancellation or something, but I didn't have spots. We were literally booked out 3-4 months just to get started. Wow. On bonds after that. And I don't say that arrogantly. I say that is a lot of people would then be tempted like, well, bring in a bunch of associates or, that comes with its own challenges. Right. And I did try at times to bring an associate in and it wasn't working and it wasn't the right fit. So it isn't to say you had to do the way I did it. The whole myth that like, well, they're going to go somewhere else or, well, in some instances, yes. But if you've differentiated yourself as a provider, right? And people want your services. And at that point, my practice was mature. So I had a lot of families and friends of families that, came to me. They weren't going to go somewhere else. And they knew like I was really busy and I was booked out. And think about it. If you know of a really good surgeon, right? Or you need a procedure done. Right. You're going to wait a few months to get in with that person if you feel that they are going to offer you something that is superior. If it's getting your hair cut and it's like, I could kind of do this in anywhere and I don't want to wait that long, well, then you're going to try to get it done more quickly. So I just encourage people to not get caught up in that keeping up with the Joneses of, oh my God, if I don't get every patient in that calls today right away, I'm going to lose them. Stick to what works for you and your vision. Yeah. And that was one thing I would say I'm very proud of is I never felt the need to just keep seeing more people in a day. I had my window of how many I wanted in a day. And when I filled that, I just went further out. Yeah. And I think that's how I preserved my quality. and why I didn't, because I never, ever wanted to compromise my quality. I never wanted anybody to say, well, he used to be, he used to do great work, but, now that he's so busy, I don't know. That was like my biggest thing that motivated me. I always wanted people to be proud of the DeLuke smile that I gave them. I never wanted that compromise. So do you agree that sometimes people chase the number of patients and the volume, and that can be a bit of a trap you fall into?
Of course. I think it's the same type of mindset as keeping up with the Joneses, a bigger house, more cars, more boats, everything. But now in business, more chairs, more locations, more patients per day. And you have to be mindful that that'll come with sacrifices. And you're right. I think it's just the natural progression of business, right? You start out small, you start out boutique, like white glove service, really catering to the patient and every need and want that they have. As you get more patients, you're not able to do that, right? And so where do you draw the line of saying, hey, let's stop here, because otherwise we are going to start compromising customer service on quality of care. And I think that's where it sort of corporate goes off the cliff, because they don't stop, right? They keep going. Right. And every year they want to improve. And that's something
they have to. That's what their business models are built on.
That's what I hear from my, colleagues who work there, is that every single year they want growth. And if they don't get it, then they either start cutting staff, they start cutting the supplies. It's crazy. But
cut your reimbursements, cut your buyouts.
I think what you mentioned is very important. Going back to how to be a successful private practice owner is differentiation. And you have to provide It's not necessarily. You have to provide the best value. And that's what Kiyosaki taught us too. People don't care about price. They care about value proposition. How much value do I provide for the money that you're paying me? And I think everything that you did, and first of all, you're so generous with your knowledge and with your experience, and we're very thankful. I think I speak definitely on behalf of all the residents that we have, mentored simultaneously, as well as many other people who have listened to you and have learned from you. Is you're very generous with your knowledge, and you're sharing the knowledge of the things that you were doing to differentiate yourself. And that's what I love about orthodontics, is the result at the end speaks for itself, and people can criticize your diagnosis. They can criticize your treatment plans. They can criticize your mechanics. But at the end of the day, what you show, if it stands the test of, quality and ABO, then like they can't do anything, right? Like they can't challenge that. So I think your results speak for themselves. I think your practice philosophy speaks for itself. And that's what you were able to do. And now we're sort of getting to next level, which I think is going to be a great way to sort of wrap all this up, which is now you're giving back. And you're giving back because you say, and you're conscious of this, hey, I can only see so many patients myself. And I don't want to see more because I'm going to start compromising quality. I understand that. But how can I continue to have an even bigger impact on the lives of not just my patients, but of all orthodontic patients in the United States, around the world? And the way to do that is to teach others what I have been doing, so that they can have the same difference that I've been having in the lives of my patients. And that, I think, is where you're going, and you really are changing the paradigm, Mike. I'll tell you this, I haven't shared the story with you. One of my top pediatric dental referrals, she texted me this week and she said, hey, Daniel, I just went to the Florida Dental Convention and I saw this guy, Dr. DeLuke, lecture. And what he showed is incredible. And have you heard of him? Like, do you know who he is? And I said,
I think I know. I might have heard of it.
I said, Doc, not only do I know him because, our professional paths in teaching have crossed, but I'm about to actually record a podcast with him later this week. And you're right. What he is doing is amazing, and he's changing the paradigm. And part of why you've been able to do that, not only that you challenged yourself and you pushed the boundary, but also because you are utilizing the new technologies that we have available to us that we didn't have in the past, right? Super elastic night ties, CBCT, tats, all of these things that we didn't have before, that is what led to sort of the foundational knowledge that we have of orthodontics. But we can't let the fact that these new technologies are here cloud the fact that, we can't continue to be restricted by our knowledge of the past where those technologies were not available and where those approaches were not available. One of the stories I tell my residents is a lot of ortho residencies mandate that the residents go take the TWEET course, right? And the TWEET course is a very famous, historical course, and at least in American orthodontics, but even a lot of international students attend the course. Yep. So I joke around with them. I say, guys, this is very comical to me, because if I went to a residency of cardiologists and I told them, hey guys, I have this incredible continuing education course. First of all, you're going to be there for like 5 or 6 days. I think it might even be longer. And we're going to teach you how we were doing open heart surgery in the 1950s. How awesome is that?
That's awesome.
Like it's just ridiculous even thinking about it. And yet in orthodontics, we're sending all of our young talent that we're trying to mold into the future of our profession to learn techniques that were used in the 1950s and that ignore all the technological advances that we have had in our profession in the last 70 years. I think that speaks for itself. Why we're doing that, I don't know.
It's so true. And I think, first of all, thank you so much for the kind words. And I greatly appreciate that. You sit behind a microphone or you're putting content out online and speaking. I lecture quite a bit now throughout the year in different places throughout the country. You leave and you don't know the impact it has. So it really is rewarding for me to hear that, someone who was at that meeting that I spoke at just recently went back and was that invigorated and excited by what I taught during that 3-hour course. So I really appreciate that. And please pass my thanks along to her as well for the kind words. That to kind of finish up the conversation, I think it's a great place to wrap up as to how we can improve orthodontic and really dental education as a whole going forward. And you touched on something really important there. And that is orthodontics. The tradition is really, really amazing in our profession, right? We're the oldest dental specialty. And I think sometimes we get caught up in that tradition and we haven't really changed to keep up with the times. I mean, just the mere fact that people argue against 3D imaging. Initially, I get it. When it came out, the radiation doses were significantly higher. That's not the case anymore. And then people literally say, like, it's too much information. I don't want to be responsible for that. Or I don't want to see in 3 dimensions. And it's comfortable in that 2D world. So to use your analogy from the heart surgeon, imagine if they were like, hey, we've got this camera that is color and will allow you to actually get like a totally different perspective when you're doing catheterization. Like now, I'm kind of liking the black and white, fewer dimensions. It's craziness, right? And it ties into everything we've been talking about, where if you are part of a bigger system, if you are part of a bigger practice, orthodontics, one cog in that wheel, if you're a surgeon and you're doing that surgery, you can change that camera, that whatever in that OR. And if anything, it's just going to improve your efficiency and your ability. With us, people don't think about this, but once you change your brackets or your scheduling or your diagnostic processes, we are dealing in such volume and so many patients in a day that it can really throw a cog in that wheel. And next thing you know, like your whole practice is just not running the same way, right? And you're thinking, well, why am I going to change? It's working. You're still making people look better than they started, right? You can easily justify it. Like, look at the before and after, like their smile looks better. So it's not like there's this direct negative consequence of doing it. And you don't know what you don't know. You don't know that you could have treated that patient in half the time, maybe not had to remove teeth in cases that you did otherwise, healthy teeth, and get a better result with a broader smile and a better smile arc, right? It's just hard to help someone see that. So I'm glad you brought that part up. And I think it gets to, at the core of it, is the unfortunate situation within academia. You were obviously very, very blessed in your residency and to have the situation you had at Seton Hill, where you had all these people who had private practice experience. That is not the norm. Right. And the other thing that's not the norm is seeing young kids. Most orthodontic residents out there, they will graduate from a residency and treat 1 or 2 patients under the age of 8 ever. Right? Or 8 or under ever. And it's usually just maybe an upper expander or maybe a face mask headgear, something, but it's very, very few people. So it's also pushing their comfort zone to get out there and say, well, maybe we should treat patients a little younger. Maybe we should be a little more proactive in our approach to patient care, not as reactive. And not that you and I can solve this, but what are some things that you think we could do to help our profession not be stuck in techniques from the 1950s and keep up with the times and continuing to advance patient care? Because we can do all those things you and I have spent this episode talking about with culture and practice identity and sharing a vision with your teammates and your mindset. And if we don't continue to advance, the pediatric dentists and the general dentists are seeing a big deficiency in what we do. And they're realizing that we are sticking to being two straighteners. We're not doing the dental facial orthopedic side that we talk about. We're doing the orthodontic side. And we're good at doing the orthodontic side. But the GPs and the parents and the pediatric dentists are starting to look to us. And I got asked at that meeting by, 5 different people afterwards, why aren't more orthodontists doing this? I am so tired, Mike, of sending patients to the orthodontist at a younger age, and they have narrow arches, high vaulted palates, crowding, all of these things at 5, 6 years old even. And the orthodontist just keeps saying, we're going to wait, we're going to wait, we're going to wait. How do we change that mentality in our profession?
Well, I think it's a very good question. And, I think it starts with the training. And you mentioned that we just don't see that many young kids during residency. And, even the AAO will say every child should be seen by the orthodontist starting at age 7. But in most cases, they just get placed on observation. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is we don't get enough experience in our educational training seeing young kids, right? And that comes with its own set of challenges. That's why we have a whole nother specialty in dentistry related to that, which is, of course, pediatric dentistry. Because yes, and I would say in me trying to implement a lot of your teachings, that is the most challenging aspect is, doing a full bonding on a 6-year-old is not the same thing as doing a full bonding on an 11 or a 12-year-old. And so that does come with a learning curve. I've sort of had to revisit a lot of the basic pediatric dentistry tenets, tell, show, do, be very comforting. My assistants now know when they see a bonding and it's a 6 or 7-year-old, we know we're going to have to be doing a lot more explaining than we otherwise would when it's an 11 or a 12-year-old. So,
yeah, and that takes time, which is, again, what a lot of our colleagues don't want to do, right? And if you were in a corporate to tie this all in, like, you maybe couldn't do that. Maybe they'd say, no, Dr. Camacho, you can't take that extra time to go through the diagnostics, right? Because you had to go through different diagnostics, looking at more than just the teeth and the crowding, but now you're taking more time in the bonding. It's like, no, hey, look, a bonding is a 75-minute spot. You can't take more than that. And that, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons I see it all the time. That's one of the reasons this is hard to implement for some people.
But it sort of goes back to where you're saying, once you see something, you can't unsee it. And I think that's why this colleague of mine, who is a pediatric dentist, reached out to me and said, hey, you got to look at this guy because what he's doing is incredible. And the results speak for themselves. And then even in my own limited experience with these types of approaches, and I think one of the great things you've been doing, along with other people in our profession and in dentistry as a whole, is trying to bring in more of that breathing and airway approach into our daily practice. I start asking the questions because I'm seeing it in my patients. I'm seeing the enlarged tonsils. They're telling me that they're snoring. A lot of parents now come to the consultations with videos of their kids sleeping. And I'm surprised to hear like what's going on. And you actually see them in the video stop breathing sometimes, And so the fact that you're asking those questions, because again, compared to, let's say, medicine, at least. Medicine, as we've said, they're overwhelmed. They have no time for their patients. They're overworked. But we have a little bit more time than they do. And so if we're asking these questions that nobody else is asking, then they're starting to realize, hey, this guy is next level. He's not just here to put braces on my kid and make money. There's a lot of caricatures out there in culture about orthodontists. But this person really cares. And they're really... digging deep into what is going on, and they're giving me something that, yes, not only creates space for the teeth, which is in and of itself is great, right? The fact that we now have early interventions that allow us to avoid extractions later on in the future. And of course, independent of the airway benefits of that, it just creates a broader, more beautiful smile. I'll have that debate with anybody. But we're also having an impact on their development, right? The fact that they can breathe now, that's going to allow them to, behave better, to learn better, to just thrive better. I mean, that's stuff that I didn't think that I could do as an orthodontist.
Right. Me neither. Yeah, I didn't think I could do it. You're so right. I mean, that is really, to tie it all in like that is just so awesome. And it's so wonderful to hear you're having that experience. And I appreciate you sharing it. And that's why I'm so passionate about this. That's why I teach this. That's why I fight, sadly, a lot of people in our profession who don't like what I say and what I'm talking about, because every person who has given it a shot and who has started to open their mind to seeing things differently and not just being a tooth straightener, you can still be a tooth straightener. Like, I took a lot of pride in being a very good tooth straightener. I went to UConn. Like, we really take pride in doing that. I'm not putting it down or mocking it or saying that there's no tremendous benefit in that. You can be
both, and you can be both
than just that, right? That's the thing. You can be both. I still had plenty of cases that they came in to see me or they came in even at 7 and they didn't need anything, and you wait and you treat them when they're 12 and you give them an amazing smile. It's not like there's no value in that. It's that you're exactly right. You can be both. You can also recognize that 5-6-year-old who comes in with dark circles under their eyes and narrow, high vaulted palate, and the parent takes the phone out, which I love to hear that more parents are doing that. That means the message is getting out there and showing them the kid suffocating at night. And you can start to use your knowledge that, okay, the way we breathe does affect the way the face grows. And we've known that since the 1870s with adenoid facies. First time that term was coined. So we know that these things are happening. And now that we know the neurocognitive impacts and the behavioral impacts on these kids from not breathing properly, and then, Daniel, to think about, and you encapsulated this, we can do something about this. Like, have you had the experience yet where a parent comes in and says their child's actually breathing better because of what you've done, or sending them to the ENT, that it's actually gotten...
It's a combination approach. And, in a lot of these phase 1 cases where, and again, I'm still in my own learning curve and my own learning process, it is a little bit more challenging for me to do the full mouth bondings. So I still do a lot of phase 1 expansion, upper and lower, actual expanders. But the first thing I tell them is, okay, if we suspect that part of the windpipe issue is obstruction, I want you to be evaluated by ENT first. Let's see how ENT can manage that. And so I explained to them, listen, it's first we have to make sure that the pipe is not obstructed. And then if the pipe is too narrow, then we'll make it bigger. And, when we have done those combination approaches, again, the results speak for themselves. And I find a lot of these kids who have ADHD or, behavioral issues, after I'm done with them, they're like super calm in the chair. The parent is thrilled. They're performing better in school. I mean, it really is transformation.
It really is. You're changing these kids' lives. That's why I'm so passionate about it, because I saw it in my practice every single day. And you're right. I mean, I evolved to do the braces and wires approach, but before that I was doing upper and lower expanders, and I still got the same feedback. I didn't really know what I was doing at that point, that from the airway perspective, because I was just trying to help them normalize their anatomy and grow. But parents would say to me all the time, like, even before I knew that this is what I was having an impact on, like, Dr. Mike, do you think it's coincidental that like they're sleeping better at night, or they're waking up less grouchy in the morning, or they've stopped wetting the bed, or they're doing better in school? And at the time, I say this often, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, I was like, well, I guess, it could, probably didn't hurt anything. Like, I didn't know. And we didn't learn this. And then once I got my cone beam and I'm looking at airway and working with ENTs and allergists and putting the whole picture together, I then realized, oh my gosh, once I started investigating what sleep disordered breathing is and why these kids are having these troubles, I'm like, I'm playing a role in changing these kids and these families' lives. Like, this is so cool. And I still get to be a really good tooth straightener, in part of my practice too, because I love doing that. So, it's really profound. And you really, honestly, Dana, you are so far ahead of your time. If I didn't know that you had been out as short of a time as you have, I mean, you have a lot of wisdom for a guy your age, and you are going to change a lot of lives, not just in your patients and in your community. Fort Lauderdale is very lucky to have you. You are going to do great things in teaching, shaping the next generation of orthodontists. And I'm more than happy to pass the baton to people like yourself to be able to take this and go to the next level. And this is why I'm so passionate about it. You know, people often say to me, why don't you just give up on the orthodontist? And I said, because yes, a lot of the older ones, they're never going to change. And I get that. And even some younger ones will never change. I am constantly encouraged by the number of orthodontists that actually do change and that actually open their minds to the way we can be better. And you're hitting all the marks. I mean, from a practice management standpoint, vision, your financial acumen, and what you're doing from a fiscal discipline standpoint, your patient care, your delivery, amazing stuff. This has been an absolutely amazing conversation, and I'm so glad we had it. And we will have many more together. I want to make sure we stay in close touch. And if there's anything I can do for you, please don't hesitate to let me know. I'm happy to help you in your journey any way I can. I'm just on the other side of the alligator alley here. So if you need anything from me, but if people want to reach you, how can they? If they have other questions or want to learn a little more about what you did and how you did it, if there's any young docs out there who are maybe scared to take the leap and they just need some guidance, how can they reach you?
Definitely. No, they can reach me through my email, and we can put that in the show notes. Yep. I'd be happy to, help anybody. I love mentorship and sort of going off of what you said. If you be the difference that you want to, be the difference that you want to see in the world, right? And speaking more specifically about orthodontics, you are trying to carry, to bring about that change, because it's not going to happen by accident. It's going to take time. It's going to take hard work. There will be pushback like anything else. When you're trying to change a paradigm, it's going to be challenging, but you got to be there, right? And you got to be there for the next generation. And I think that's, in closing, what I think both you and I would tell other people is, if you feel that you want to help the profession and you want to advance these changes, get involved at the educational level.
Yes.
Because that's where it all begins.
Yes.
Right. And just as you alluded to, that I was fortunate enough to go to this residency that was built a certain way and whose philosophy and mindset was a certain way, you can be that person in another residency program. Yeah. Right. And for me, at Seton Hill, I do it through Zoom. I go in person to Nova, and I can't tell you how, grateful those residents are to have people like us there. Yeah. We're on the younger side. By the way, I still consider you on the young side. You look great.
Thank you.
and we share these experiences of our passion for clinical orthodontics, for patient care, for practice management. And ultimately, we just want to make their lives better, and we want to make our profession better. We want to make the lives of our patients better. And that's so rewarding. So really, I think to anybody who even has the itch of wanting to teach, reach out to your closest program. Most chairs are happy to have you. Even if, for me, one of the concerns was, and maybe similar for you, the stuff that I'm bringing, I know for sure doesn't align with the orthodoxy, right? Or with what everybody's
establishment of academia. Yes. Right.
But most chairs will be quite open to it. And of course, as long as you still, we all follow evidence-based and we do what's best for our patients. I don't think any of us do things on our patients that we wouldn't do on our own kids or on our own family members. As long as we do that, I think they welcome the differences of opinion. And at the end of the day, the residents will speak themselves and they'll say, hey, this is something that we want, this is something that we don't want. But just providing value to people and to enhance our profession, to enhance our patients. It's an awesome time in orthodontics. I'm very thrilled. I still have a long career ahead of me, but I think, and I tell this to my residents, final point here is the orthodontics that you practice when you get out is going to be completely different from what you practice 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And that's been the case for me. Do I absolutely do extraction cases still? Of course. There's some in which, I don't see a way. But it's much less, right? And I've learned things that I didn't know before of how to treat those cases successfully. Yeah, and that's what I would tell people. And thank you for the opportunity. This has been an amazing conversation. I hope we inspire people, and I hope we change the mindset, just like Kiyosaki changed our mindset many years ago. I thought, I hope we've laid down that seed and then we've watered it a little bit. And now people are saying, hey, maybe even if I have $500,000 of student debt and I'm about to graduate, I can still purchase a practice and I can do a lot of these things that these guys did because, we're smart, but we're not that smart,
It's so true. Believe in yourself, know your vision, know who you are, what you want.
Yes.
And maybe you go out and work for someone for a couple of years. Great. But your vision might be to start one. Don't give up on it. That's another thing we didn't say, but going out and starting to work for someone and then spending everything you make and not saving for the opportunity to then buy into a practice, you end up falling in these traps. So if you know what you want, it's possible. This is an amazing profession. And what we get to do each and every day, I'm so glad you said that. And I'll let you kind of us leave it with that, is that this is an amazing profession. And we argue over extraction, non-extraction, phase one, not phase one. We argue over these things. At the end of the day, yes, we have the ability to change people's lives in a way that very few people out there can do. Even if you're just going to stick to straightening teeth, right? You still can give people self-confidence and,
right.
But I really love the idea that you should never practice 5, 10, 15, 20 years into your career the way you did 5, 10, 15 years prior, right? Never. In 5 years, you should look back and look at how your cases from the way you used to do it and right, see how much you've grown as a practitioner. And if you're not doing that, and that goes for academia too, if you're teaching residents things you taught them 20, 30 years ago, exactly, and you're using technology we used 40, 50 years ago, just like you said with the tweet example, then you are not doing this profession and you are not doing the patients or the residents, in that case, a service. We need to constantly push the envelope, and change comes from pushing that, again, evidence-based with knowledge and fundamentals. You're not cowboys that are just going out and doing anything, but you have to push the envelope and push it responsibly. And the results speak for themselves, like you said.
Right.
Yeah.
Amazing. No, a great time. Thank you so much for having me. And, keep on doing what you're doing. I know it comes with a lot of headaches and a lot of, risks, but, you certainly have a lot of people that cheer you on and that want you to continue, because ultimately you are going to make a difference. You are making a difference now, and you'll continue to make an even bigger difference, not only on the national stage, but I also think on the international stage. So thank you so much, Mike. Great time.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Daniel Camacho. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for sharing so openly and honestly. Absolutely amazing. And I know this episode's going to help a lot of people. So thank you.
Hopefully. Yeah.
All right. Appreciate you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Doc Podcast. Be sure to visit theorthocoach.com to get access to ADA CERP recognized CE courses, or to schedule a private one-on-one coaching session with me. Also, if you know of someone who would make a great guest for this show, or if you'd like to be a guest yourself, please email me at drmike@theorthocoach.com. And be sure to join the Doc community on Facebook for more great content. Thanks so much for listening, and always remember, you have been blessed with the ability to do amazing things.